Look, I've been to summer camps before, okay? You do some canoeing, tell ghost stories, and survive on bug juice and marshmallows. Easy peasy. But this summer camp? Man, it was different from the get-go. We arrived at Camp Willowbrook, and everything seemed, well, normal. Kids were running around, counselors were laughing, and there was even a welcome sign that said, "Where adventure awaits." But what caught my eye was the forest surrounding the camp. It was dense. I don't know how to describe it. It's like it was whispering secrets you weren't supposed to hear. Anyway, fast forward to the first night. We're all sitting around the campfire, and this dude named Josh starts telling a story about the Whispering Woods. That's what they called the forest. Apparently, some campers went in years ago and never came out. Everyone's laughing and joking, but I can see the counselors shooting nervous glances at each other. Weird, right? The next morning, my buddy Mark and I decided we'd go check out the Whispering Woods. We were just going to go a little way in and come right back out. No biggie. So, we told our counselor, Sarah, we were going on a nature walk or something. She hesitated, but finally gave us the thumbs up. The woods were darker than they should have been, even in daylight. Every crunch of leaves under our feet seemed to echo way longer than it should. I was about to suggest turning back when Mark tripped over something. It was a small wooden box half buried in the ground. "Dude, should we open it?" Mark asked, holding it up. I didn't like the idea, but hey, we were already there. So, he opened it. Inside was a piece of paper with one word: run. We stared at each other for like 2 seconds before bolting back towards camp. But the more we ran, the more it seemed like the forest was shifting or something. Trees looked unfamiliar, paths twisted in weird ways, and the whispers got louder. Finally, we saw something that made our hearts drop. The same wooden box, right in our path. How was that even possible? "We're going in circles," I gasped out of breath. We were freaking out. Then, the whispering grew louder, almost like it was forming words now. "Stay, stay, stay." I grabbed Mark's arm. "We can't listen to it. We have to keep moving." We picked a direction and ran. I don't know how, but we finally broke through to the camp clearing. We didn't stop running until we got to our cabin. That night, we told everyone what happened. Of course, they all laughed it off, even when we showed them the box and the note. But I saw Sarah talking to another counselor, both of them looking super worried. The next day, camp activities went on like nothing happened. But Mark and I noticed something. The woods seemed quieter, like they'd gotten what they wanted. On the last night, we had a big bonfire party. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As the fire blazed, Sarah came up to me. "Look, I can't explain, but please promise me you'll never go into those woods again," she said, her voice trembling. "Promise," I said, and I meant it. As everyone celebrated, Mark and I threw the wooden box into the fire. It crackled and popped before being consumed by the flames. That should have been the end of it, but as the fire died down and everyone headed to their cabins, I heard it again. The whispering, clearer than ever. "Thank you. Now stay." The woods went silent, but the pit in my stomach hasn't gone away. We all left Camp Willowbrook, but I can't shake the feeling that a part of me never left those whispering woods. And something tells me they're still waiting for the next camper curious enough to listen. Man, I was pumped about camp. Summer, no school, and a whole lake to swim in? Sign me up. My parents dropped me off and pretty much sped away, happy to get their alone time, or whatever. Didn't matter to me, I was ready to dive into all the camp stuff. Kayaking, bonfires, and all that jazz. First thing they did was assign us cabins. I was in cabin 6 with 3 other dudes, Tim, Mark, and Jake. We hit it off right away, trading stories about school, video games, and what kind of mischief we hoped to get up to. The first couple of days were a blast, but then weird stuff started happening. It was the 3rd night, and we were all lying in our bunk beds, chit-chatting about whatever. That's when we heard it. A sort of whispering sound coming from the corner of the room. We all shut up, looking at each other like, "You hear that too, right?" Tim, trying to act all brave, said, "Probably just the wind, guys." But Mark shook his head. "Wind doesn't whisper, man." We all laughed nervously, but nobody wanted to check it out. We eventually dozed off, telling ourselves it was just our imaginations. The next day, things got weirder. I was walking back to the cabin after lunch when I saw something scribbled on the door. It was a word written in what looked like charcoal. Leave. Hey, you guys seeing this? I shouted to Tim, Mark, and Jake, who were lagging behind. Yeah, real funny, man. Did you write that? Tim accused. Why would I? I shot back. We wiped it off and tried to forget about it. But that night, the whispers came back, louder this time. We couldn't ignore it anymore. Even Tim was spooked, and Mark suggested we talk to the camp counselors. But Jake said something that made us all freeze. What if it's one of those camp legends? You know, like a ghost or something? We all laughed it off, but nobody slept well that night. The following morning, we went straight to the counselors. They looked at each other, then shrugged it off. Boys, you've got active imaginations, that's all. Feeling dumb, we headed back to our cabin. But when we got there, our stuff was tossed all around like a tornado hit it. Clothes, sleeping bags, everything. And on the mirror, written in what looked like fog even though the day was hot, was the word leave again. We couldn't ignore it anymore. We had to find out what was happening. That night, we came up with a plan. Tim and Mark would stay awake on lookout, while Jake and I went around the camp, checking other cabins and the woods, trying to find anything weird. Hours passed, and just as we were about to give up, we heard it, the whispers, but this time they were coming from outside. We followed the sound, our flashlights shaking in our hands. Finally, we reached a clearing in the woods, and in the middle was an old well, covered in vines and leaves, and the whispers, they were coming from the well. Gulping, I grabbed a rock and tossed it in, expecting to hear it hit the water. But there was nothing, just an endless silence, and then a cold wind blew, extinguishing our flashlights. "Run!" Jake screamed, and we bolted back to the cabin, slamming the door shut behind us. Tim and Mark looked at us like we'd seen a ghost. Maybe we had. We barricaded the door and didn't sleep at all that night. The whispers came and went, but nothing got in. By morning, we were all running on fumes, bags under our eyes, jumpy at every sound. On the last day of camp, we found a note under our door. "Thank you for listening," it said in a shaky handwriting. None of us spoke about it again. We packed our stuff, said our goodbyes, and left Cabin 6 as fast as we could. My parents picked me up, and as we drove away, I took one last look at the camp. I saw the counselors taking down the sign for Cabin 6 and replacing it with a new one, Cabin 7. I never went back to that camp. We never figured out what the whispers wanted or why they thanked us. But every summer since, when the air gets hot and the nights grow long, I hear it again, the whispering wind, and I can't help but wonder if Cabin 7 hears it too.
It was supposed to be the best summer ever. You know, the kind where you make memories that last a lifetime. Camp Willow, man. That place was like a dream. Canoes, bonfires, and the woods that stretched on forever. And then there was me, Josh, a kid way out of his comfort zone, surrounded by all my buddies from school. But you know when you get that feeling? That something's off, but you can't put your finger on it? Yeah, I had that the moment we drove past the rusty old sign that said, "Welcome to Camp Willow." The first couple of days were a blast, though. We went hiking, had marshmallow wars, and even pranked at the counselors. But I kept catching glimpses of something in the woods, dark shadows flicking past trees. My best friend, Mark, just shrugged it off. "Man, you're just imagining things," he said. Maybe I was, but something felt weird. The counselors told us legends about the forest, stuff like haunted caves and missing people. Spooky tales for the campfire, they said, but their eyes said different. And then it happened. On the fourth night, we played Capture the Flag in the dark. Armed with flashlights and walkie-talkies, we divided into teams. I was on defense, hiding behind a bush, waiting for the other team to charge at our flag. That's when I heard it, a rustling sound, like someone sneaking around. I held my breath, gripping my flashlight, ready to jump out and tag whoever it was. But the rustling got louder, and it wasn't coming from the direction of the game. It was coming from deeper in the woods. My heart raced. I thought about calling it in on the walkie-talkie, but decided to check it out myself. Big mistake. I walked in, my flashlight scanning the darkness. Every little sound made me jump, the crunch of leaves, a distant hoot of an owl. But I pushed on, and that's when I saw it, a clearing up ahead. And in that clearing was an old wooden shack. It looked abandoned, and curiosity got the better of me. What could it hurt to take a quick look? I stepped closer, and the door creaked open by itself. I should have run, but I didn't. My feet moved on their own, pulling me inside. The air turned cold, and I fumbled with my flashlight, pointing it around. Dusty old furniture, cobwebs, and in the middle of the room, an old dusty mirror. As I looked into it, my reflection started to fade, replaced by dozens of eyes staring back at me. Dark, lifeless eyes that seemed to be pleading for something. My heart almost jumped out of my chest and I bolted. I ran like I'd never run before, not stopping until I burst into the clearing where everyone was gathered. I was breathing hard and my hands were shaking. "Where have you been?" Mark asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't bring myself to tell him or anyone. They wouldn't believe me. The night passed and we all went back to our cabins, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes staring back at me. The next day, I had to find out what it was. I needed to know. So I waited until everyone was busy with archery and slipped away. I walked back to that clearing, but the shack was gone. Yeah, you heard me right. Gone. Like it had never been there. I searched the woods, but there was no sign of it, like it had just vanished. I felt my skin crawl like I was being watched, and I hurried back to camp. I didn't talk much for the rest of the trip. What was there to say? No one would have believed me. And maybe it was better that way. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed in that shack, but some questions are better left unanswered. We left Camp Willow the next day, all of us quieter, like the woods had taken something from us. I still hang out with my buddies, but we never talk about that summer. We never talk about the eyes, because deep down, I know they saw them too. And every now and then, when it's dark and quiet, I can feel them, watching me, waiting. And I know I'll never forget those unseen eyes of Camp Willow, ever.